Welcome. This is the Growth and Natural Resources Committee. We are going to start out with rezoning Z4023. And then after this rezoning case, we will discuss litter. I think, Hannah, you're up.
Sounds good. Good afternoon. Hannah Reckow, Planning and Development. This is rezoning case Z4023 at 13120 Strickland Road. I'll provide kind of overview of the request. We have staff from Raleigh Water and Stormwater and other trades if you have questions after. So this is a site located near I-540 off Strickland Road. It is a little over 16 acres in size, currently zoned R4 conditional use, and is being requested to be rezoned to R10 conditional use. There are also two overlays, a SHOD 1 and a Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District that the applicant is proposing to retain. The Planning Commission reviewed this request and made no recommendation and voted it back out to the Council. And the City Council has scheduled that public hearing for next Tuesday on June 4th. So this is a conditional use request. There's a handful of conditions, 14 total. The first one requires all residential dwelling units to be affordable to no more than 80% of area median income for 30 years. Other conditions speak to minimum setback from the shared property line to the east and protective yards along that property line, as well as expanding the block perimeter allowed and really only requiring a sidewalk connection to the east on Saxon Way. And then also requiring a sidewalk connection to the west to the adjacent shopping center. Conditions also commit to additional storm year events, managing that post-development storm discharge. So the UDO requires 2 and 10-year storm events to be managed, and the zoning condition would also add the 25 and 50-year storm, and then also adding the 25-year storm to management of stormwater during construction. Additional conditions pertaining to nutrient management and lowering the maximum impervious surface allowed on the site to 28.5%. And then 50-foot building and parking setback from Strickland Road, and an increase in the minimum tree conservation area required on the site up to 20%. And then requiring use of green stormwater infrastructure on the site, regardless of the kind of the percentage of built area. Requiring certain design and construction standards for sediment basins, requiring a larger watercourse natural resource buffer around the perennial stream in the north of the site, be 125 feet. And then a condition requiring the property owner have at least 10 acres within the Falls Lake watershed, outside of the site, within the watershed in Wake or Durham County, be preserved as open space through a conservation easement benefiting a conservation trust. So those are the zoning conditions. I'll mention that the last 4 were added after Planning Commission review. Sort of the high-level view, this is a request to rezone from one residential district to another. Additional housing types are allowed, so townhome and apartment types are allowed, so that increases the number of units you can locate on the site. Setbacks also change, especially with the zoning conditions that are applied, and then just a general increase in number of housing units. The request is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. and that includes the future land use map designation of rural residential. The Planning Commission, as I mentioned, reviewed this request and voted it out without a recommendation. As I mentioned, there were changes to the zoning conditions after their review. So that sort of wraps up the staff introduction. I'm happy to answer questions you have before you proceed.
Just curious on the 10 acres to be preserved, how would that be determined or identified? Would there be specific requirements? I don't know, just, how are we going to determine where this would be?
Sure, and I'm pulling up the exact language of the condition. So the condition specifies that that land be within the falls watershed, outside the site, located in Wake or Durham County, in an area that's not otherwise restricted by development by a private agreement. So those are the bounds that that zoning condition lays out. So if it meets it, it would meet the condition.
So no particular conservation merits of the site. I mean, it could be any type of land.
Yeah, that's my understanding of the condition.
Okay. I think I saw Councilmember Branch and then Patton.
Yes. So you stated that is it still inconsistent even with the four new? And did the four new items remove any other consistencies?
Yeah. So the amendments to the case, and there's Raleigh Water staff here that may want to expand on this, but added particularly this condition 14, identifying land elsewhere in the watershed to conserve. I believe Raleigh Water is satisfied with it. Does not have further concerns about the request. There are all, that condition also improved consistency with two of previously cited inconsistent policies around preserving drinking water. The request is still inconsistent with the future land use map, and I believe overall, but it did shift it.
Are there any departments that still have any objections or concerns with this case?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Okay. Well, he's not with the city. No. Any city departments. Okay. Thank you.
If I can just follow up on that, I'm trying to understand. I thought there was a concern about the drinking water supply shed here, and I'm not sure what's changed there. I might have missed it.
We have Ed Buchan from Raleigh Water. Looks like he's coming to the podium.
Yeah, thank you. So what was different from our perspective is the offer to preserve 10 acres. We've invested millions of dollars in Falls Lake Watershed through our watershed protection program, demonstrating our belief in conservation and how powerful it is from a mitigation perspective. And conceptually, it's similar to our nutrient mitigation trading that we do on the wastewater side. So there's nutrient offsets. So we feel like preserving 10 acres in the watershed would outweigh anything that could else happen here. And we also we can provide a link, which is ArcGIS file link to our model that we use to determine where we should conserve areas in the watershed protection program. It uses the amount of stream footage on a property, and it also values uplands too, but it identifies areas that we find the most valuable from a water quality perspective.
And so, Ed, can you tell me what would be preserved? Would it be meeting some identified locations that you think are of note? Or is that, I guess, in this condition? I'm kind of wondering, does this meet our goals, or could it be somewhere that's not as useful?
I mean, that's a good question, and that wasn't specified in the condition, so we'd have to see what the answer was to that. I can't answer that because I don't know exactly what they're going to preserve it. But if they use the model that we typically use for the watershed protection program, we would be in support of that.
Thank you. I think there was Councilmember Patton and then Black.
Sure, yeah, I have maybe some other ones, but I'm sorry, I might just be re-asking the same question. So you have a map of like high priority areas in the watershed that you'd like to preserve, and you feel like this preservation of 10 acres is sort of a fair trade. But do we have any reason to believe the 10 acres that will be provided are one of these high priority areas that you're referencing?
I think that's what we were just saying, that ideally it would be, for sure.
But it's not committed here in the condition. Okay. All right. All right, you go ahead, Councilmember Black.
Hi, so I actually have follow-up questions with the priority areas. I would love to see exactly where this case fits into that, but also I have questions about if those priority areas fall into areas that aren't within the city of Raleigh, because it touches other areas in the county and other counties, surrounding counties, and we've seen where there's been development by other cities in the Falls Lake watershed area that's impacting potentially like the clear cutting, the nutrient runoff, and all of the water quality in that way. So I just want to understand if those priority areas extend to other areas of the Falls Lake watershed, like the complete aspect of where the watershed is. And if there's other cases that have happened within the last few years, like we've been seeing, that are in those priority areas particularly.
So I don't know if we have hardly any high priority areas in Raleigh's jurisdiction. We've got just a fraction of a percentage of the Falls Lake watershed inside of our jurisdiction. Maybe a handful of those places, but very few. But to answer your question, the model that we use looks at the whole Falls Lake watershed. So all 6 counties, majority of the watershed is outside of Wake County. And so we're looking at Granville, Durham, Person, all the other different counties involved. So yes, that model covers all of that. And I'm not aware of a similar zoning case like this where there's been a conservation condition in the past. So
Is that just here in Raleigh or here across the whole all of Falls Lake?
just Raleigh for what I know.
I would be curious to see other areas fit into the comprehensive, you're bringing back those areas that are potentially ripe for development or have been ripe for development in other areas, and how other counties and municipalities are impacting the development within that watershed that go outside of Raleigh, just so we can have more of a holistic understanding.
Okay.
Can I clarify the scope of the request? Is the request to understand development that has happened in the watershed or conditional zoning that impacted similar conditions? I just want to make sure the staff is really clear on the request. Could be both.
Wouldn't it be both? Yeah, I think so, both.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to follow up, that might be a conversation that we could have for an additional committee meeting to really go over fully some of the development pressures that we're seeing in the watershed, and then what are some of our protections across communities, municipalities, and counties and jurisdictions. I wonder, Ed, if you could just speak to the original concern that Raleigh Water had about this case, the density concerns that were raised, and just to speak to that briefly here.
I think in a very broad sense, the concern is more people usually means a bigger impact on water quality. That's not always captured in nutrient calculations. Certainly that's part of it, but anytime you have more people, there tends to be more trash, there's more animals, there's just a lot more different things that could impact water quality. So that's the overall concern that we had. And also, when we say precedent, I think some may think of the precedent for Falls Lake watershed, and that's part of it. But the larger part of it for us is that we still manage 2 other water supply watersheds. One is Swift Creek, and the other one is Little River, which has not been developed yet. And we get a lot of pressure from our merger partners to develop in those areas and densify and upzone. And so, you know, the concern would be we want to make sure that we're being equitable throughout all of those water supply watersheds.
And what is the density rule? I remember there is like a certain amount that's, per acre recommended. Can you just talk about that?
Well, I think it depends on the zoning. I mean, I think this is 4 houses per acre. A lot of places it's 1 house per acre. So it's a larger area. And it differs a little bit between Little River and Swift Creek. They all have slightly different rules. But again, we're trying to be consistent throughout those drinking watersheds.
Thank you. Councilmember Branch?
Yeah, a couple of things. I know in the past we've purchased property. I remember a case, I think in Franklin County, where we purchased land. I think if we could share that information of the watershed and what the city owns outside of Wake County, that would be helpful to other council members as well. And I think that leads to the questions that you're asking. And you can see what we own and what's protected at this time. My question that I have is, you mentioned that we have our own selection process of properties and things, and this may be more towards the city attorney or to the planning staff. Can we modify this condition to include that they will use the city selection map in order to select the 10 acres? And then I think that goes back to the point that you made, if they use our methodology, we're happy with this condition. So my question is, can we add the use of our process in helping the applicant select the 10 acres?
If the applicant agrees to that.
Yeah,
We can't, right.
We can't force it,
Yeah,
but
that's something you could ask of the applicant, if they would modify the zoning condition further to say that there would be a certain selection process used to identify the 10 acres.
okay, thank you.
And as a point of clarification, we do own some properties through our watershed protection program, but only about a handful, like 3 or 4, because we can't own property, or we generally will not own property outside of Wake County. And because there's a lot of stewardship requirements for these properties, we tend to give them
To a conservation. Right.
Yeah.
So when I say own, not necessarily owned by us, but there's a conservation that owns it, that protects it from being developed with the city's assistance.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I think this one might be back to planning. Is it customary that in the watershed, R1 would be like that would be like the customary zoning associated with something in drinking water supply shed?
There is a small area guidance policy that states that density should not exceed 1 dwelling unit per acre unless a conservation development option is used, and then in that case, up to 4 units an acre.
Okay. Do you have a history of the life of this parcel? It's my understanding it was R1 and it became R4. Did it have it doesn't have any conditions on it now that it would use?
It does have zoning conditions on it, yes.
I'm sorry. So currently it's R4 with the
Sorry, with conditional use district.
Okay. Do you have those the current conditions?
I'm pulling them up.
Oh, okay.
So the current conditions, which were approved in 2022, limit the site to no more than 20 residential dwelling units, prohibit some other uses, looks like specify a minimum 50-foot building setback from a property line with shared properties, and also require protective yard along certain properties. So those are the 4 zoning conditions currently on the site.
Got it. So it doesn't use the conservation management style of development that you just named.
That's right.
But that I'm sorry, you said limits it to 20 dwelling units?
Maximum of 20, yes.
Okay, so on a 16-acre site, that's just a smidge more than 1 per acre. And that didn't make it, was it, we didn't have to amend the future land, would it not have been inconsistent with the future land use map at that time?
I would have to look back
Okay.
at the notes. I don't know that off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I can find that.
I have another question, I think, for Ed. My understanding is there is a research study that Raleigh Water has contracted to look at the impact of density in the Falls Lake watershed or generally drinking water supply. I do just want to note, the Falls Lake watershed provides, water for over 500,000 folks, and not just in the city of Raleigh, also, I believe, Wendell and Knightdale. So that's why we're taking the time on this one. But yeah, can you remind me what that study's goals are and when that might be completed?
Yeah, so we're working with the consultant that's doing the work for the UNRBA for the Falls Lake Nutrient Management Strategy. And so they're well-versed in the impacts of development and from a nutrient perspective and other potential contaminants as well. And so they're working on that now, and they have a statement of work to move forward with that. Their lead engineer has had a health issue for the last 2 weeks, but she's back now, so we're able to move forward with that. And really, we want to have a tool in place so that if similar cases like this come up, we can go to that so that we'll have an understanding of what those impacts might be.
Okay, great. And do you have a sense of timeline? Even is this a year out, 6 months out?
No, this is like months, like maybe 2 months.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other questions for staff at this time?
Can we hear from stormwater staff too? I'm curious if the stormwater the issues flagged by stormwater staff in the staff report feel resolved based on the
So
conditions.
it looks like
provided?
Ben Brown is coming to
On
the
his way.
podium. Thank you, Ben.
Good afternoon. Yes, we've reviewed all the attached conditions, the ones that specifically speak to water quality. And yes, it is above and beyond what the current zoning conditions are for us, and it does get you farther towards our, lower than our nitrogen targets now and lower than our phosphorus targets, as well as restricting the impervious from 30% to 28.5%. And also the detention after construction and during construction as well is above and beyond what we would use. So any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Okay, I think we'll move on to hear from the applicant. Just to check, how many folks were planning to speak in favor of this case? Could you raise your hand? So I see 1, 2, 3, and then 4 with the applicant. And then how many folks are here to speak in opposition to the case? Please raise your hand. I think I see 1. Okay. So I think 10 minutes should be fine for both sides, and you can hold time if you want as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Beth Trejos. I'm an attorney at Fox Rothschild, and I'm here today on behalf of Oppidan, who's the applicant in this case. We do have our team here, Noah Wagner and Courtney Coble with Oppidan, Charlie Townsend, our civil engineer with VHB, and Jennifer Robertson with Atlas Engineering. And we do have a little presentation involving a number of our team members, but we'll adhere to our time limits. This case that Oppidan proposes is to utilize the subject property as for rent affordable housing. And this area is in an affordable housing opportunity zone in the comprehensive plan. It's a great location for affordable housing because there's amenities like schools, grocery stores, restaurants, shops, pharmacies, doctor's offices, dentists, vets, gas and vehicle service centers, and banking services in close proximity to the site. And these amenities also, create job opportunities for folks that might live in these affordable units. For instance, school teachers, nurses, pharmacy techs, physical therapists, vet techs, daycare workers, estheticians, beauticians, and mechanics would all meet the income requirements to live here, and they could find jobs in the immediate area, which is pretty unusual for this area, which is quite expensive. The property's at the far edge of the Falls Lake watershed across busy I-540, and we propose to retain that overlay and further restrict with zoning conditions. As you've heard, our conditions limit impervious area to 28.5% of the site, where the ordinance would allow 30% of the site to be utilized for impervious area. We require the use of GSI, increase the detention requirements for the 2, 10, 25, and 50-year storm, limit nutrient export beyond current code requirements, so roughly a 10% reduction of both phosphorus and nitrogen in the conditions. We add special conditions for sediment basins and our commitment to preserve at least 10 acres of property within the Falls watershed as open space with a conservation easement enforceable by the city. Raleigh Water indicates that they support land conservation as a means of offsetting water quality impacts from development. And I will tell you that we are not familiar with their selection map, so that's not something we have considered. We do have a site in mind in the critical area of the Falls Lake watershed, but we don't know whether it would meet the city's selection requirements. In addition, in our conditions, we have provided for building setbacks, setbacks along Strickland Road to honor the parkway frontage in this area. And of course, our commitment to affordability, that the units would allow for a maximum AMI of 80% and an average AMI of 60%, something that this council has indicated is an important goal to them. So we feel like the provision of affordable housing meeting these stringent requirements is reasonable and in the public interest. This chart, and our engineer will go through this in more detail, but summarizes the previous R1 zoning requirements, the current R4 zoning requirements, and our proposed R10 requirements. And you can see the proposal exceeds all of the zoning requirements. We did receive a report from SMAC on this project in March. We were not invited to participate, but we took seriously all the comments that they made, and that's the genesis for a lot of the changes to our condition. So we utilized their recommendations in working with city staff to add these additional conditions. And so if this were to set a precedent for the watershed, it would be a very high precedent, exceeding what could be done under existing zoning. And so let the other members of our group come forward and speak. Jennifer Robertson with Atlas, briefly.
So Jennifer Robertson, Atlas Environmental, and we're the environmental consultant for the project. So the property does have surface waters present. There's one perennial stream and 2 wetlands. We have been to this property 3 times now from November through April. So we have seen this site during the wettest time of the year. We have submitted. So we know we have surface waters on site. We know that those surface waters are regulated. We are coordinating with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the North Carolina Division of Water Resources on all of the approvals that we will need for the project. So just going through the handout real quickly, the first couple pages are our map of the surface waters. So we have the perennial stream and the 2 wetlands. The next 4 pages of the handout are photos of those areas, both the streams and the wetlands and the uplands that surround those areas, and then a map of where all those photos were taken. And then it's standard practice to use the Division of Water Resources stream forms. And so we, for each of the drainages that were on site, we completed the next 3 pages, which are 3 stream forms for the 3 drainages that are on property. And this entire package has been submitted to the Army Corps of Engineers. We are awaiting approval of the surface water delineation and, if any impacts to, obviously the perennial stream, the applicant has committed to preserving that with a 125-foot buffer. But if any other impacts are necessary, we will go through that approval process.
Good afternoon, I'm Charlie Townsend. I'm going to kind of go a little bit more in detail onto this chart that you see here in front of you. So the previous zoning, back before the most recent rezoning, was R1. R1 and R4 with the conditional use both had a 30% impervious surface limitation. We are exceeding the city's requirements and we're restricting ourselves to 28.5%. And so we're improving beyond what could have been built prior by limiting that further impervious. For that forestation area, we're keeping that the same. However, we are increasing tree conservation area to 20%, which exceeds the previous R1 zoning. The difference between tree conservation and forestation within the Falls Lake Watershed Protection Overlay is forestation is trees that can be replanted. So we are more than doubling the current requirement of 10% to 20% that we are going to preserve those trees as they are today. Further, we did have the 10% reduction in the nitrogen and the phosphorus limit. To our knowledge, it's the first time that's been proposed as a zoning condition. And then with that, we're committing to stormwater retention for the 2, 10, 25, and 50-year storms. That 50-year storm even exceeds the new City of Raleigh stormwater manual that's being under consideration. Additionally, during construction, we're committing to no more than we're committing to the 25-year runoff for any point of discharge during construction. Current city code is only the 2 and 10. So once again, we are going above and beyond with the code. There is public utilities if annexed. That's true across the board. There are public utilities in the immediate vicinity as well. What we're proposing here today is trying to figure out a way that we can get more affordable housing in a denser area, but still mitigating all of the environmental impacts by meeting or exceeding any sort of quantifiable measure from City of Raleigh code. With that, I'll give note.
Should we reserve, we would like to reserve the remaining time for rebuttal if appropriate.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to set the clock again for 10 minutes, and I believe we have one individual who would like to speak. And again, you can also hold time if you'd like to speak again.
Before I begin, am I able to advance the slides myself with the mouse? Yes. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Harrison, council and committee members. I'm Gil File. I'm offering some additional points in opposition to this project on behalf of myself and other affected homeowners. Essentially, the 2 main points are that this is in a protected watershed area, and it presents many complexities. But secondly, this is a very intensive project. And by way of brief context and to the point of Ms. Patton's questions, how did we get here? What's the context for this property? And this property was the subject of 2 prior rezoning requests. One was in 2016. The file number there is listed. But the request was to rezone from R1 to R10 for 64 units. That was withdrawn after the Raleigh Planning Commission came down with a pretty blunt report and in that regard. But that 2016 request offered greater restrictions for density, more tree conservation, impervious surface, greater buffers and setbacks. So it was found to be inconsistent with this environmentally sensitive area, both with the comprehensive plan and future land use map. So those conditions still exist today. Nothing about the actual land has changed. And so that was withdrawn by the owner. This very same owner, barely 2 years ago, again sought rezoning from R1 now to R4 conditional use for no more than 20 units. And one of the unspecified conditions on this was no multifamily projects. And this is a proposed multifamily project. So now we're moving the ball. We were here 2 years ago, and now we're going to nibble some more and go further. And maybe 2 years from now, or whenever a permit could be issued, let's nibble some more. Now let's tie in to Saxon Way or do more. But again, this is in the watershed area. This would create a substantial negative precedent. We have existing bad examples of what this kind of development does to watershed areas. So we have the same owner, same property, located in the same Falls Lake watershed protection area, that now wants a 150-unit, 3-story multifamily apartment complex. Parking for that, if you looked at ADA requirements and so forth, what is that, 300 parking spaces? So that's substantial, okay? So this is, affordable housing is a good purpose. There's no question about that. There's no question that we need affordable housing. There are other sites for that, but the rezoning issues that we have, the policies that we have in place serve their own good, important public purpose, and that is to preserve the quality and integrity of our primary drinking source. We can't just magically make that better once it's polluted. We heard from Ed, who said, we've invested millions of dollars into watershed protection, so that's how we get here. So affordable housing does not change the nature of the site area at all. It's inconsistent with the impact and the plans. It doesn't mitigate anything. So the purpose doesn't mitigate anything about the property or its environmentally sensitive area. So what do we need for a 3-story apartment complex? A 1-story foundation? Is that going to require blasting? I don't know. Have they said? I don't think so. A 1-story foundation would be substantial, but that's the estimated excavation needed to support a 3-story building. It's extreme deforestation and intensive grading on this project we'll get into. There's no major public utilities or sewer, which would be obviously required. I don't think that goes into a watershed area. It's generally disfavored. I don't know that it's ever happened in Raleigh. I don't know. It would require extreme engineered stormwater management. The most recent UNC Falls Lake study, tells us what we already know, which is forested lands surrounding watersheds act as a filter. There's no engineered stormwater device that's a great substitute for that. And the Falls Lake watershed, according to the study, is already at a tipping point. So research shows, the study said, that when forested area drops below 70%, there are measurable negative impacts on the watershed quality. So here we're at about 60% that's forested already. All right, and that's the vital component for nutrient management, is not engineered stormwater and some kind of hypothetical loads that may or may not actually happen for nutrients, but actually unfiltered, undeveloped land is the best part of that. Now, here's a current example where in the news we hear about the tomato soup result at Lick Creek and several other creeks that feed directly into Falls Lake, the very same watershed area. It's caused by overdevelopment. And now the city of Durham and Durham County are spending $3 million of additional taxpayer money for a watershed improvement plan. Okay, so what benefit did that overdevelopment create? Now they're trying to help the water quality. My prediction, to the extent it matters, is it won't be enough. So additionally, we've got a Strickland Road Park Pond that's a current beneficiary of a $2 million bond for an improvement project which includes green stormwater management. This is right down the road from the site area, literally right around the corner. And the development runoff from a 3-story, 150-unit building and 300 parking spaces would drain downstream into the Strickland Road Park Pond, which they want to create a pond overlook area at this park, and a green stormwater management. Those seem to be inconsistent. So in terms of the 150 unit, I've heard various numbers. I've heard 73, I've heard 148. 148 was on their slide today, so I don't know what that looks like exactly, but that's at least, 4 to 7 times greater than the actual conditional use zoning entitlement that they have now. So that's substantial. And again, the express condition 2 years ago was no multifamily. And I guess they said, okay, yeah, we promise. But here we are now talking about multifamily 4 to 7 times greater than what they have. So we'll wind up with, potentially, a tomato soup muddy mess in that watershed area and to an adjoining park pond that we're spending a couple of $1 million of our taxpayer money to create. The topography of this site is extreme. It's not uniform. This shows a 119-unit project in Raleigh, low-income tax credit project. This would be substantially bigger on this one, but there's a 9% to an 11% or 11.6% slope down towards adjoining homeowners that are right off the lip of this project, all the way up to a 19.6% slope towards Strickland Road. That's extremely steep, so it would require intensive grading, excavation. These 4 additional requirements aren't any additional requirements. They've already been present, 55-foot setback and so forth. So this doesn't really mitigate the extreme impact that this is going to offer. And here we have some pictures showing the slope stability and the drainage runoff. You can look up the hill, and there you see the Harris Teeter complex, which is not in the watershed. It's not supposed to drain into the watershed area. But you can see where this is looming over the adjoining homeowners, and this is taken from a homeowner's property. This is another picture of that. And a limited sight line. They say, well, there's going to be a 4-lane road on Strickland Road, but they're very limited. There are retention ponds already on this property. This was taken on April 4th, I believe, April 3rd or 4th, right after a reasonable rain. And these things are failing, and it shows that they just are a mess. Those adjoin the properties. So there's no master plan. There's no specifics. We don't know what property they're offering. You know, wouldn't any offered property be conserved anyway since it's in the watershed? I don't think that's a consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to let those in favor, if you want to speak again, and then we'll have council discussion and questions.
I think at 1:28. Or just put it at 2 and start.
Thank you, members of City Council. So we heard from our development team regarding the stormwater aspects, and we've discussed how we are protecting the watershed in that regard. The items that Jennifer ran through were brought up because the SMAC report that was brought up previously found differing on-site observations. So it's no secret that this area of Raleigh has become unaffordable and unattainable to the masses. Much of that is because of outdated watershed policies limiting the number of beds on parcels such as this one. With this project, we are offering a solution. We are improving upon all stormwater policies found in the UDO, as Charlie walked through earlier, and self-imposing income restrictions between 20 and 80% with an average of 60%. If approved, this project would be the only affordable housing built in District E in over a decade. All other districts have carried some fair share of affordable housing. We thank you for all your time and consideration, and we ask you to support bringing affordable housing to North Raleigh.
All right, thank you. I do have a couple comments and questions. I'm just going to lay them all out and then kind of see where they go. I do just want to mention, I do have the Falls Lake research study here. Thank you for bringing that up. We have one of our co-authors here, Dr. Barbara Dahl. So if anyone wants to read it, it's, I don't know, 100 or so pages, and it's really helpful. So lots of good stuff. Yeah, it's from the UNC Collaboratory, and they were brought on, to study the Falls Lake watershed for the last few years and provide some really great recent data. I do have to say, our watershed policies, I don't see them as outdated. I see them as very important to securing, safeguarding our water supply. So this is very important to me as we consider this case. And what's, allowing me to even consider the case is because of the income restriction that is here. So it is the affordable housing that makes this potentially, to me, worth considering. But again, a few questions. I would like to know, and it sounds like we don't know yet, but I'd like to find out whether this proposed 10-acre of conservation meets our city priorities. That would be important to me. Don't need to talk about it now, but it's something I'd want to find out. I'd also like to know the number of parking places planned. I do have some concerns about the grading on the south side of this parcel. It does, when I was on this property back in the fall, I believe, I can see the steep slopes. I do have concerns on that south side, grading as you have to build the driveway to move through. It seems like you would really do less destruction if you came in through Saxon Way. So I put that out as, something to consider. And then finally, I really appreciate the effort to, increasing tree conservation, to, having less impervious surface in this case. But I would like to find out, maybe this is from staff, what is the average amount of impervious surface of R4 in this area or other, similarly developed areas? Because even though the impervious surface limit is 30%, oftentimes the homes that are built, my guess is they don't take up more than 50%. And I don't know if staff could speak to that.
Throughout the city, including the watershed and outside, our rule of thumb for R4 is 38% impervious is kind of what we see for a R4 subdivision. Now that is based on a fairly tried and true standard that has not been updated in a couple decades, but yeah, so 38% is kind of what we're set at, and that's also what our impervious limits for small site residential development is based on as well for the R4 zoning district. But we're happy to do some more research specifically in the Falls Lake watershed to look at those impervious numbers. There's not much R4 in Falls Lake, but we can certainly pull those numbers.
What would R2 likely be?
R2, question me today. I believe that's 25% is what our impervious limit for R2, and R1 is 20%.
Okay, I'm sorry, you're talking about limits. I'm thinking of more of on average, what do we see when the property's developed?
We base those limits on kind of what the engineering standard is for what you expect for runoff coming from an R4, an R2, and R1 development, so.
I think the question is what actually exists in built form across sites, and that may be something we may need to do some more research on.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Councilmember Branch.
Yeah, just a couple questions because the I don't know your name. I just say opposition. Sorry. Brought up some points about parking and construction and engineering. So is anyone here from engineering services? Okay, I'm going to lean on transportation then to maybe help me get to my question. Anyone that can answer this. When we talk about construction and engineering, right now we have this zone for 20 units. And the data, I know that sheet said 148, but if I'm correct, it's 73 is what they're proposing. Is that correct? 73 units?
The 73 is the staff estimate.
Is the
That's
staff
maximum,
estimate?
yeah.
Okay. So my question though is, in building by right and doing the apartments, what's the difference in that engineering? What's the difference in having to do grading? What's the difference in surfacing? Because that, a lot of that impact and the things that I'm hearing from the opposition of this case is that building the apartments has a bigger negative impact than building 20 townhomes. So I'm trying to see if maybe we have someone in here that can speak to any of that.
I don't think from a city staff perspective, we have anybody in without seeing a site plan or some basis to analyze on. I'm not sure that the staff would want to speculate on the actual site development impacts. And I'm not just looking for confirmation. I don't think that that's analysis we've done or would be prepared to speak to.
Okay. And again, the reason why I'm asking that question is because when we talk about construction, and for me looking at a single building with multiple units and then townhomes, the question is, are they attached, or if they're detached, then you're talking about multiple piping that has to go to those individual units. That's different impacts to the grounds. So that kind of will help me, since we're starting to really dig into the dirt with this case and understanding that environmental impact. So I don't know who can bring that to us later, but I know at least for me that would be helpful.
Yeah, we can look to see what might just exist in generalized information about what kinds of construction methodologies support what kinds of development. But in terms of any site-specific analysis, I don't think the staff would have enough information about what's specifically planned to do a like-to-like analysis.
Got you. And with the 73 units piece there, I know we have removed parking minimums, but from a staff standpoint, and I'm leaning towards this transportation corner, hopefully someone knows this. Is there an idea on average of how many parking units or parking spaces would be built for a 73 unit subdivision? Or Pat, maybe?
And can there be clarity? Are we talking about 73 or 148 units? Because I saw both.
I can only go by what's in our conditions and what was sent to us.
So the 73 is not in the conditions, it's based on staff analysis.
Staff analysis.
It's based on a set of assumptions that includes things like unit size.
So are you doing 148 units, or are you doing 73? And then that'll help planning.
We plan to build 148 units within that
148.
same footprint.
Okay.
So, a footprint that could accommodate, 20 single-family homes or 148 affordable housing units.
Okay.
And Beth, before you go too far, doesn't LIHTC require like a 1.6 ratio on the parking spots?
I am not the expert on LIHTC. Noah,
Pat
maybe you can
Arns
speak
wanted
to
to
that.
know.
But I would point out the parking still has to take place within that impervious area.
Correct.
So we cannot exceed that limit, which is less than the code requirement.
And NCHFA is the allocating agency. They require a 1.75 parking ratio for family projects, but they often review sites specifically to determine how many are feasible.
This is Pat Young with Planning and Development. I can just verify that since the elimination of parking minimums, we've seen between 1.5 and 1 3/4 spaces per bedroom as an average. As you just heard the applicant indicate, there is a process. We've seen it happen on numerous affordable projects to get that number down to closer to 1 if NCHFA agrees.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Patton.
Yeah, a handful of questions. First, just a comment. Just wanted to flag that the Leesville Shopping Center and the Saxon Way homes that already exist are in the watershed and do also have water and sewer. So just want to flag that there is existing water and sewer in this area. But questions for the applicant. I appreciate all the work you've done to this point. Have you considered reducing the unit count just for some of the reasons that our staff flagged, like more dog walkers means more dog waste and all of that.
I think our thought was that if we could get more affordable units, that would be better, particularly given that this is a highly populated area already. 540, which is super busy, runs right behind it, Strickland Road, in front, also very busy. The shopping center immediately adjacent and across the street. We felt like this would be a great place for people to live, in close proximity to these amenities. Maybe today they're driving from far away to their job in this area, and maybe they could live here and walk. So we just feel like this is a great site for something that is really needed in this area, and that we are exceeding the requirements of your code, even without, the additional 10 acres, which is a further benefit to the watershed.
I'll just add on the parking spaces, I recognize it may not be financially feasible, but one best practice would be to have the parking, underneath the building itself, to take away some of that surface parking. I mean, 148 units times 1.75 parking spaces, that's a lot. So I'm just thinking about, is there a way to minimize that impact? Are there other questions or comments from the committee? Yeah, Councilmember Branch.
When will you hear back from the Army Corps of Engineers on their review?
And I would just make sure everybody knows this is something that will be required in our site plan process, but we tried to get ahead of it.
So the package has been submitted. We haven't heard from them regarding a site visit, if they want to come out and review the site. So my estimation is probably another 30 to 45 days before we would have the paperwork back from them that approves the work that we have done on site.
Okay, thank you.
I think just comments that I'm thinking of. I'm not sensing that we might be done with this conversation, and so, but things I would be interested in the applicant considering before we see this case again would be something inside of reduction in the number of units, with a thought toward like less units equals less parking. The resident who spoke did flag blasting concerns, and we have seen conditions around like stewardship of blasting protocols, and so that might be something to explore, or like further consideration of like grading, of how the grading might be managed during construction and after. So those are some of the things that I am flagging for y'all's consideration.
Yeah, at this time, I don't expect a recommendation from this committee unless someone would like to make a motion. My expectation would be that this information is summarized and brought back to our June 4th council meeting. So just some of the comments from the committee, and then to the applicant team, if you can, be prepared to speak to these topics, that would be great for the public hearing. But at this point, I would move that we take this out of committee, and we'll see it on June 4th.
Second that, I just have one question for clarification. This is a 4% tax credit, correct? Okay, thank you.
Is there a question that you want answered right now?
There are directions that I gave for questions that
So I can do my best to summarize some of the notes that I took. What I understood is that your goal would be to share with the council major points of discussion and further inquiry that you believe are appropriate. You have already scheduled the public hearing for this case on June 4th. So I'm happy to use my personal notes to reflect potentially for your information some of those things that I could work with the clerk to ensure between our notes are reflective in your notes. I think there were requests to provide more information about the methodology and mapping of priority areas for conservation in the Falls watershed. There was a request for additional analysis of development within the Falls Lake watershed, and what, if any, conditions that had been offered related to conservation in that development, what areas had already been protected through conservation easements in Wake County and surrounding areas in the Falls watershed, including a map. I think there was exploration that you had asked from the applicant to better understand the grading that might be planned and what alternative access opportunities might exist. To understand generally the average areas of development on sites in our
The amount of
R1,
impervious
R2, impervious surface, and I think R2 and R4 development. I think generally a better understanding of the kind of building methods that might be used on a single family construction versus a multifamily construction, and generally what those environmental impacts were. I think, and then generally I think there was a high level articulation of encouragement to look for continued opportunities to reduce impact of grading and blasting, and to potentially look at a reduction in units. So that those are the notes that I took. I'm certain the clerk has additional notes, and we could certainly compile our two notes in terms of the backup material.
Also, to Councilmember Black's point, maybe we could also have a motion on the table to bring back to committee a fuller understanding of the Falls Lake watershed and development patterns across the region. If we were to do that, I would recommend inviting perhaps Forrest Westall from the Upper Neuse River Basin Association, even having a presentation about this study, I think would be really valuable. And I would love to see other municipalities and counties have those same in-depth conversations, as we are all interconnected and depending on one another to safeguard our drinking water supply. Is that speak to your kind of need?
Yes and no. Yes, on the side of information, but no on the side of like making a decision around this. So if we vote it out of committee and then move forward with the hearing on Tuesday, like we're not gonna have that information. So that's like my concern. And if we want to move forward like that, we can.
So I think we have options after the public hearing, but we have to have the public hearing. Like even if we had things we wanted them to do today, we couldn't make those recommendations because we haven't had the hearing yet.
It's already scheduled.
But I know, so it's scheduled for Tuesday. So I think with that happening, there are options coming out of Tuesday in which it can be held in committee, sent back to committee or to the body.
To make a decision until
and
we
things
have
of
this
that
committee
nature.
meeting. Yeah.
So there are options. One thing I want to keep in mind, I do have one question since we're having this discussion. I know it's quarterly, what's the deadline for the NET's 4% submittal for tax credits?
They have a rolling application between May and September.
Between May and September? Okay. So I just want us to be aware of that part and those deadlines so we can work and make sure whatever we decide for or against is done in time for, if this were to move forward, is done in a time that they can meet the financial deadlines. Plus, I'm sure Housing and Neighborhoods is going to have to put some money into it if this was approved.
Yeah. Councilmember Patton.
Yeah, I'm just wondering procedurally, the things you described, Deputy City Manager, were pretty extensive and not quite like easily compressed into like an email that we could receive before the council meeting. And I'm wondering if we can allow this conversation to continue to sort of run parallel tracks. We've noticed the public hearing at the council level, so we have to open the public hearing. But can we provide a summary to the rest of our colleagues while leaving the item in committee while we wait for the answers that you've described? I don't know if that's.
I think procedurally, the better way to do it is refer this out to the city council. It'll be a part of your report your committee report, which would come before the public hearing, because the public hearing will be in the evening. I think that's correct.
I was just texting Pat to confirm whether this was scheduled for day or evening.
I think it's.
I believe it's evening.
Yeah.
Getting the nod.
It is evening, so
Hannah's
there
shaking
would,
her head. So you give your, you'd give your committee report in the afternoon session, evening session is the public hearing. During public hearing, you can hold the public hearing and close it. If you do, there's a short window of time for them to change their conditions, so we would advise you leave that open. And then you could defer it to a future meeting that gives you time to have a committee meeting in the interim, and just like you did with Z72, I think, you referred it to a committee and deferred the public hearing. And so you could do that as well. I think that's what Councilmember Branch was referring to with options.
So if we vote it out, it would be voted out with no recommendations or no comments, but we can have the opportunity to update the rest of council during the updates, but will we have the information by that time, by Tuesday?
no, to be clear, I think it is very unlikely. Staff will do what they can at the hearing to address as many of the questions as they can that have been identified. In terms of the timeline for us to actually publish the agenda and get materials into the agenda material, staff will have really limited time for that. So staff will work to address as many questions as they could at the public hearing based on this, but there is the possibility that there is information that we won't have available before the 4th.
Okay, well, I think we should vote it out with recommendations. I understand what the city attorney's office is saying procedurally, how it makes sense, but I wouldn't support moving it out of committee, but yeah.
What are the recommendations?
Whatever we feel, we haven't gotten the information back yet on what we feel, so we're just kind of like sending it back without any thoughts, and we're just gonna update people, but we're not gonna have the information to updated. So is it just gonna come back when we do get the information as another update of what happened during the meeting rather than here's what we think about the case as a committee?
From what I'm hearing, based on the conversation we're having, I'm thinking we're going to have the public hearing, and after the public hearing, this is going to be held open and probably referred back to our committee.
Nothing ever gets referred back. That hasn't been a process I have seen. So, I mean, I'm sure that's an option on the table, but it's not something that I have seen happen. So that's just my thoughts on it. But, yeah.
I don't know what to say then.
I don't really think there's anything to
Make
say.
that part of the motion, or we can vote it back to the full council with a recommendation it return to committee. Councilmember Harrison, I don't know what's on deck for the June meeting.
We are full on the June meeting, so it wouldn't come back to us until August.
They'll miss the September deadline. Is it September 1st?
I believe so. I would have to double check.
Yeah. Yep, it would miss the September deadline.
Unless we want to have a special meeting about this case and, create some special discussion.
Well, the thing is, even if we meet, it still has to go back to council. And council still has to vote out whatever suggestions we have. So the other option would be then, what for me thinking, is that if we need more conversation, we will have to do that again at the July meeting.
We don't meet in July.
We do, July 2nd.
Oh, wait, what?
We meet on July 2nd.
July 2nd, okay.
I'm going to continue my motion. I believe there was a second to refer this case out of committee. And then I just want to make it clear that we can always bring it back to committee and make that motion. I also want to make a motion, if it makes sense to you, Councilmember Black, that we will have an August committee meeting about the Falls Lake watershed in general, development patterns, what we're seeing across the watershed, so that we can have a fuller conversation. And then I do believe, to Councilmember Branch's point, I don't see this case being done on June 4th. I have a lot of questions that aren't answered still, and I don't expect that we'll have all the answers by then. And I think
Those
there
are two motions?
Yes. And the first motion had already been seconded, so let's
Yeah.
do that one. That is to move this out of committee with no recommendation in a summary. So all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? One. So that's 3-1. And then the second motion is to have that fuller conversation about the Falls Lake watershed in August at GNR. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. And all in favor? That was unanimous. Thank you. I know we have some other topics that we want to cover today, and I want to make sure that our guests have a chance to present. We do have a staff presentation about litter, about both some of the activities that the city is involved in to prevent litter, to manage it. But then also we have some guests that are going to speak about research that they've done as well as strategies they're working on. So just in the interest of time, if that's okay, I want our guests to speak first, and I believe that's going to be Dr. Barbara Dahl and perhaps Samantha Kropp, and I'm sorry, I think one other individual.
No, just
Okay.
Samantha and I. But we also have Preston Ross from the Great Raleigh Cleanup here with us. So we want to go through this very quickly. Thank you, Dr. Harrison, for inviting me to come speak to the committee. And thank you for your time and those in the audience as well. And I guess I can click here to advance the slides. So we think of, we see it in the media a lot about plastics in our oceans and our waterways and sea turtles and fish being entangled. And so it is a global issue, but it's also a local issue. The top row of photos I have there are all from various beaches and marine waterways around the world, but the bottom row of pictures are all in Wake County and Raleigh. In fact, they're in the Raleigh city limits, including Richland Creek on the left. There is Marsh Creek off Capitol Boulevard, and then, in the bottom picture on the right, that is the Neuse River further down where this trash floats from our tributaries in the city down to our river. Okay. All right. So why would we care about these plastics in our waterways? Well, it does break down into small fragments called microplastics, and these things accumulate in organisms that then are eaten by crabs and fish, are filtered out by oysters, and they end up on our plate. So we end up eating those. How many of you out there like seafood? Ah, right. So the plastics also carry compounds, chemicals that are a threat to our health, including endocrine disruptors, and I'm not going to read all the different things there. I'm not a medical researcher. But there's concern from this, and we see a lot about this in the news now. So because of that concern, of that kind of thinking globally, but considering our river and our waterways in North Carolina, we have this Pamlico Sound on the right, and it has the rivers draining to it. And we have that Outer Banks chain of islands, which prevents a lot of water from transferring between the ocean and the sound. So everything out here in the Pamlico Sound is going to be coming out of the rivers, and the Neuse comes out here in the Pamlico Sound. So our water here in Raleigh, we talked about Falls Lake, everything happening above, that's our drinking water, but everything that leaves Raleigh is going to head down the river to communities along the river and end up in the Sound. So we did a program to sample for microplastics, so smaller fragments, and some macroplastics, the larger pieces that are visible to us very readily in the Neuse River Basin. And we selected 15 sites, that's all the green dots, that's our full Neuse River Basin map. And to look at those, how many microplastics at all those sites and the macroplastics in the upper portion of the basin where we have a lot more urban development. Because as you know, the Neuse Basin is very urban at the top, and then it goes through a lot of rural ag land in the lower part of that basin. So for the microplastics, we trawled and we baled water samples and sent them to Wilmington to the Plastics Ocean Project to find whether or not those samples had plastics in them. And we found plastic particles in all of our samples. We had a big range of what we found in there. That's shown on the table here. But I want to point out that red oval going around the urban sites in the upper part of the basin, draining Raleigh and our communities, had the highest levels of microplastics in those samples. We found a variety of different compounds, but the most common three things we found were polyethylene, polypropylene, and polystyrene. And they were in most of the samples and comprised a large amount of those particles. And those correspond to things like plastic bags and films, like food wrappers are the polyethylene, polypropylene are food containers, and some of the hard bottle caps. And of course, styrofoam, we all know what that is. So in addition, we looked for those small fragments, but we also wanted to see how much of the bigger plastics and other litter were in our creeks. So we did a variety of sampling methods. We set up grids where we kept cleaning those grids. We pre-cleaned them and cleaned them over and over throughout a year. We did visual counts at 2 creeks, including Marsh Creek and Crabtree Creek. And we put these litter catching devices in 2 creeks, one in Rocky Branch below NC State campus and one in Marsh Creek downstream of Capitol Boulevard. And so when it rained and the storm flow comes up, these baskets and booms would capture a portion of the trash, mostly what's floating on the surface. So you can see those 2 litter catchers, and we would go out and clean them after every major storm. And we counted all the trash and categorized all of our trash. And we found that 92% of the over 11,000 pieces of trash that we collected or that we observed in visual counts at 2 creeks. So the visual counts, you just go when it's raining, the river's flowing, and you literally count what's floating by over a 30-minute period. So some of that was observed. We're not getting in the river creek when it's flowing like crazy. So most of the trash was plastics, a lot of styrofoam. We had cigarette butts, plastic beverage bottles, and you can see all the other items there. Here's one of our bins where we cataloged all that trash. And we even developed this infographic because what we found are those common macroplastics were very similar to the microplastics. So confirming what we thought, that this trash that ends up in our little urban creeks, that gets jostled around in the flow, broken apart into pieces, and then it just keeps moving down that tributary and flowing eventually into the river and down to the Sound. So this was an educational piece that we produced for Sea Grant to distribute and convey that message. At our grids, just kind of looking more closely at some of that sampling, we did that grid sampling at the 7 creeks, and the 4 urban creeks, which are Raleigh creeks, had much higher levels of trash in those grids than the rural creeks. And we see kind of different trash in those, a lot more food wrappers and film pieces in those grids because they're getting caught up on like roots and branches and things like that, whereas styrofoam and bottles kind of keep readily flowing downstream. Well, also with the visual counts, that's a lot of the styrofoam and plastic bottles, we were able to develop relationships to kind of say how much trash would come through floating, kind of really moving downstream. And what we saw in Marsh Creek is, as the flow goes up, more trash is moving through. And using this with the gauge flow from USGS, we estimated over 120,000 pieces of floating trash, mostly styrofoam and plastic bottles from Marsh Creek in 1 year. And that's not counting all the stuff that's not going in the basket and is getting caught up in other areas of the river. I had a recent master's student, Eileen Doyle, do a study looking at 4 Wake County streams, including 3 in Raleigh, that all had a watershed of about 1 square mile. And 2 of these watersheds had litter catchers, but she also did the grid cleanups as well through a whole year, regular cleanups. And she also looked at compiling a lot of information about the watershed, the demographics, the land use, the land cover, to see is there a relationship between these factors and how much trash we see in these creeks. And what she found is that the 2 creeks that were more urban, Little Rock and Rocky Branch, had much higher levels of trash every time we went to clean them compared to House Creek and McGregor Downs, which is over in Cary. And she found that the population numbers, the amount of roads, impervious surfaces, the number of restaurants, and the amount of low-intensity development were very strong predictors of trash going up, right? That correlated. As those things went up, trash counts went up, and as household income, high school graduation, and herbaceous cover went up, trash levels went down. So there's definitely a non-uniformity in where our trash is most dominant. We worked with Preston Ross at the Great Raleigh Cleanup to organize multiple cleanups of the Little Rock Creek watershed to kind of get a handle on how much trash is out in that watershed. Those were multiple dates to try to clean this watershed of 1 square mile. And this was helpful to identify hot spots of trash. We found that vacant lots, construction sites, and areas around certain businesses had very large amounts of trash, and a lot of that spilling out into the street and along the curb where it's going to flow into the stream. So this can further help us identify areas we may need to target if we're going to prevent that trash. So this kind of brings me to what can Raleigh do about this? And this is something I'm hoping to have a conversation. We're already having conversations about this with our partners, as well as the Raleigh Stormwater Program that's going to present about some of their work. So we have two kind of things we can do. We can clean it up, which we've been doing, or we can try to prevent it. Because I can assure you, every time you clean it up, you're going to come back a day, a week, a few weeks later, it's all going to be back. So prevention is really important, and we have to educate people and motivate them to do something different, right? Behavioral change. We have to provide opportunity for them to do the right thing if we convince them that's the right thing to do with this trash. And also, in some cases, some people just can't be motivated, so enforcement is a reality with trash. So cleanup, we've been doing that. We're trying to do more, and that's why I have Samantha and Preston here, because they're doing a lot of that. Great Raleigh Cleanup is an amazing organization. You can see the numbers down there of the amount of volunteers and trash. Preston is just a force to be reckoned with. He didn't want to speak today. I can't believe that, but he's doing an amazing job, and he's going to be in contract to do more with the city. And he has supported our students, our graduate students. So this is very important work he's doing. And then I'll let the city talk more about what they're doing, but Joyce Gaffney has done a lot of cleanups with volunteers as well. But we want to move into prevention, because once it's in there, again, it's going to start breaking apart. It turns into the microplastics, and you're not going to get that out. That's there. So we need to keep this larger litter out of the waterways. So we've been exploring the idea of educational signage. This is actually a poster that one of my students worked on. She's in graphics design. We believe that working with local schools in various watersheds would be a positive thing. We have not been able to do this yet. And I think a strong media campaign that covered television and radio to get the message across. People are not connecting that the trash they put out from their car or when they're walking, that it's going to flow into a storm drain, and that storm drain is connected to a creek, and that creek nearby is going to go into a bigger creek and then on to the river. So we've got to get this message out to the people. I believe there's a lot of opportunity to engage with local businesses, work with restaurants to adopt biodegradable products for their to-go packaging. I see a number of restaurants have done that, but a lot of others have not. Down here I have the Chick-fil-A cookout and Bojangles, because the Durham folks even called this the trifecta of styrofoam that they find in every one of their samples that they've been doing well, and we regularly experience this. I will point out Cookout and Bojangles are North Carolina-based companies, so I think these are ones we could work with, contacting them about potentially addressing this. So providing opportunity, Dr. Ellie Tyfina, a behavioral scientist at NC State, has said that it's about motivation and opportunity. I'm highly motivated. I would carry a bag of trash for miles, even if I was collapsing. But there are other people that they're not as motivated, so they only take a few steps before they're going to throw this trash on the ground. So we have to provide lots of opportunity. So I believe we need more trash cans around, not just near the bus stops where we're putting them, but I really am so appreciative of the city putting more of them, although I have seen poor motivation where people put the trash on the ground right next to the can. So it's both things. The why I ended up here was the Waste Convenience Center at J.C. Park being closed, because I think that was an important opportunity for not just recycling, but for some transfer. Our waste centers are scattered around Wake County outside of the high density. I've plotted here the high density areas and the Raleigh boundary for our ETJ. And you can see some people are going to have to drive very far. And we know a lot of people downtown, they don't have a truck to haul away a used couch or the money to pay somebody. So we need more opportunities for easy disposal of trash, because if we're not putting it in a dumpster, hauling it away to the landfill, it's going to end up in the street or in the woods or in a creek. And we saw lots of that at Marsh Creek, lots of clothing and furniture items in the creek just the other day. So preventing. Unfortunately, some people we won't motivate, even though we do provide opportunity. So it is the law not to litter or illegal dumping. I have yet to ever hear of anyone getting a fine for littering in Raleigh. Have you ever heard of someone getting a litter fine? I don't know of that. So I think that we need to reach out to RPD and work on the littering as well, and dumping, more enforcement of that. I believe we could identify litter dumping locations like we did the hotspot work, maybe set up a citizen reporting program for this, and then maybe there's cameras or signs, and we work and give warnings at first and then repeat offenders that we would find them. Inspections and fines for construction sites, that maybe stormwater staff need to hire an extra person that's going to construction sites, inspecting them for trash. And if they pay fines, we use this to pay the salaries of those people to do that work. So these are just some of the ideas that we've talked about. I do want to, I'll reserve questions to the end because I want to give Samantha time to talk about the work that Sound Rivers is doing. I strategically did not include that because I wanted her to come share that information.
Great, thank you, Dr. Dahl. Samantha, you're up.
Thank you, Council, for this opportunity. My name is Samantha Kropp. I work as the Neuse River Keeper with the nonprofit Sound Rivers. Looks like my slides are a little clunky, so I'm going to just scroll through these PDFs, but we can at least see them. Sound Rivers is a 43-year-old 501c3 nonprofit. We're based here in southeastern North Carolina, and our mission is to monitor and protect the Neuse and Tar-Pamlico River basins, which collectively cover about a quarter of North Carolina. And I'm here today specifically to share a bit about our work, our Litter Free Rivers program initiative, which is a trash reduction initiative that we began a few years ago and have been collaborating with a number of universities and community members to do this litter reduction work. And Dr. Dahl did a wonderful job of kind of covering the main issues and concerns that stem from macroplastics and microplastic pollution as an organization dedicated to protecting water quality. And also, I always say I work for the river, but also for everyone who relies on and uses the river. We, of course, recognize the significant impacts that pollution, plastics pollution specifically, play on aquatic ecosystems, but also on our human bodies through some of the health impacts that Barbara Dahl covered. So that is why we, in conjunction and partnership with waterkeepers from across the state of North Carolina, the Waterkeeper Carolina Coalition, back in 2021 applied for a grant through the Environmental Enhancement Grant to try to address the problem of plastics pollution. And that was a collaborative project with a number of kind of hard-hitting goals. We first, wanted to chip away at the total number of macroplastics that are making their way into the Pamlico Sound. And so recognizing the role of the Neuse River in our urban areas in sending water downstream into the Sound, about estimated 13 million tons of plastic flow into the ocean from our coastal and inland communities every year. Goal number one was to sort of chip away at that macroplastics delivery. And number two was to study the pervasiveness and, and total, quality what actually is making up this pollution. Not only the macroplastics, but we also did a microplastics element of this study. And then the third important goal was to engage the community in stormwater education through actual meaningful hands-on volunteer work in our creeks to better the water quality there. So to accomplish those goals, we installed these floating traps, and Dr. Dahl shared her versions that they kind of constructed. These are slightly different versions that we worked with an organization based in Asheville initially called Asheville Greenworks to install. But we actually, with the waterkeepers in North Carolina, we installed 15 of these throughout North Carolina all at the same time. And so these are floating traps. They passively collect trash as it flows downstream. And essentially the goal is to intercept litter before it makes its way into the Pamlico Sound. These particular designs are galvanized steel. They're about 2 feet high, 6 feet wide, 8 feet long. And like I said, they float, so they're critter friendly. Aquatic species can float and swim underneath. And they're also built for urban creeks. So these are specifically built to handle the Piedmont flashy environments, flash floody situations. They can handle up to 5,000 CFS flow, which is pretty awesome. And they have about 96 cubic feet storage capacity. So here in Raleigh, we actually, our Raleigh trash trap was our second trap that was installed as part of this grant program. And we partnered with the city of Raleigh. So we actually worked on a contract together to install one of these traps in Little Rock Creek. And so we actually chose that location intentionally. Little Rock Creek is a tributary of Walnut Creek, which of course flows into the Neuse River. And it is also behind the Walnut Creek Wetland Center. And so this was a partnership with the Wetland Center. We chose Little Rock Creek both because of the fact that it drains a large part of Raleigh's downtown area, which is of course heavy and impervious surfaces. The drainage area for this trap is actually 90%, over 90% impervious surface. So it's pretty significant. And also because of the environmental justice history of this area. As I'm sure everyone here knows, the Walnut Creek area and the Walnut Creek Wetland Center have a really storied and beautiful history of community engagement. And so we wanted to build off of that history. And the visibility. Being part of the Walnut Creek Wetland Center, people can walk over the trails and they can engage with and see and be educated by this trap. So to study the macroplastics, as Barbara Dahl kind of went into, we did partner with one of her students here in Raleigh to conduct an accounting of all of the different kinds of trash and materials and break those down into categories from films, bags, wrappers, gloves, hard plastics, et cetera, styrofoam. And I'll talk a little bit about the findings of those studies. But we also, I mentioned that we were looking at microplastics as well. With the 15 other waterkeepers that were engaged in this project, we did collect samples at all of our locations and all of our watersheds. So in total, that was 237 samples for microplastics that were taken from 30 streams across the state of North Carolina. This is actually a first of its kind data set in terms of the scope and the fact that we coordinated to take these samples along the same timeline. We analyzed the samples in partnership with the Plastics Ocean Project, and we found that microplastics were present in 100% of the samples. On average, 14 microplastics were found per 1 liter of sample, with fibers being the most common type that we found in the study. And I will note that among all of the sample locations in North Carolina, the Neuse watershed had the highest average amount of microplastics detected. So we're in the belly of the beast when it comes to this problem. So as I mentioned, my goodness, so sorry. As I mentioned, these traps have big impacts. They're estimated to be able to collect an annual amount of 1,000 pounds of trash a year. This is their capacity, which is a big deal because if we think about the lifespan of these macroplastics specifically, we have, plastic water bottles can last 450 years in the landscape, plastic bags 10 to 20 years, and styrofoam lasts over 500 years. And as Dr. Dahl kind of broke down in the accounting of what exactly we found in these traps, consistently, we found the most, around 90% of this trash is plastic, and the majority of that plastic is styrofoam, which, as I just mentioned, has the longest lifespan in our waterways, 500 plus years to, maybe never. So we, think about this as a big downstream impact. And I, would be, it would be a shame to not cover the incredible community investment that we've seen since we installed the Raleigh Little Rock Creek trash trap in October of 2022, we have engaged so many different community members of all walks of life and backgrounds in these sorts of cleanups. We've partnered a lot with the Neighborhood Ecology Corps out of the Wetland Center. We've partnered with the Great Raleigh Cleanup, with numerous local school, academic, and environmental organizations, with the Carolina Wetlands Associations, women's clubs, scout groups, and so much more. It's been a really meaningful way to get community members engaged in this conversation. And just to give some numbers, since last March, so we shifted to accounting, or from accounting to weighing, and so I'm going to give a weight, and then I can also give a pieces. But since last March of 2023, we pulled out 582 pounds of trash from the trap itself. So that does not count all of the trash in the surrounding areas. We typically do a cleanup, of course, in the surrounding areas as well, but just from that trap, which I will say, doesn't meet that 1,000 pounds that these traps are capable of. And I would say, there's a number of reasons for that. One of them, in reflection, is that this is only draining a square mile. So even though that square mile is 90% impervious, we in the future, and I'll talk about, future trap plans, but we'll be looking for greater drainage area so we can really maximize that potential. But we're really proud of this. We've had 15 separate cleanouts just in that time frame and 85 volunteers engaged. So this has been a really wonderful project for us, and we think with big impacts. And as I said, most of the trash we're pulling out is plastic and styrofoam. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the City of Raleigh for this incredible honor. Last year, we received the Environmental Stewardship Award, along with the Great Raleigh Cleanup and the Walnut Creek Wetland Community Partnership, for this trash trap and for our work, monitoring water quality in Little Rock Creek specifically. So that was a wonderful honor, and it's just wonderful to see the City of Raleigh investing in this project. And I will end just by sort of looking ahead. We are very excited that this project has become, a full-fledged program. We started just calling this our Trash Trap Project, and now we have a Litter-Free Rivers program initiative. And we're expanding. So as I mentioned, we have trash traps in New Bern and, of course, one in Raleigh. We have one in Kinston, and it was amazing. The city actually did a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and the whole council came out to celebrate this project going into their creek. We have one in Washington, Little Washington. We have one in Greenville. And we're currently in discussion and actually moving forward with a contract with the City of Raleigh for installing 3 new traps in the next years. And we just did a site visit of Marsh Creek to put a permanent trap. We did that site visit with Dr. Dahl and with the Great Raleigh Cleanup and with the city stormwater department to locate a site there that would get us the most bang and awareness. So we're really excited about this expansion. We think, in the grand scheme of things, I won't reiterate all of the solutions that Dr. Dahl laid out because we support all of those. And, I think were wonderfully stated. But we see this program, for me personally, I think the value that we see is as much about education around stormwater and getting people involved in meaningful hands-on projects and in the creeks and talking about them. It is as important, that piece, as the trash reduction piece of this. And so as we move ahead, we're definitely going to be looking to, as I mentioned, expand this program, but also we are looking to some systemic solutions in the realm of what Dr. Dahl suggested. So I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to talk more about any of these pieces, and thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. We do have one more, I believe, guest who's here from the North Carolina Department of Transportation and has a presentation.
So, his presentation is incorporated within the city staff presentation. So, Luke, if you can go to the city. So we did have representatives here from Parks, Stormwater, Solid Waste, Raleigh Department of Transportation to talk about their programs, their volunteer efforts, and some of their data and metrics. Do want to acknowledge we do have Brandon Jones with the North Carolina Department of Transportation, knowing how significant those roadways are in our system. And so it appears that it may be the will of the council to postpone most of this presentation, but we could accelerate and pull out the slides from NCDOT. And Luke, I believe those start on slide 34.
Yeah, I'll just check in with council. I think, we had talked earlier about 6 p.m. being a ending today. I don't think we'll get to all of our city presentations, so we'll have to pick back up on that on June 25th. We're starting to have a number of topics pile up, so we may need to consider an earlier start time on June 25th if we want to get to everything. I just want to put that out there. We can talk at the end. Only if we would like to stay longer, which I am completely able to. Yeah, so I mean, we are going to need to have a discussion about what we can do and next steps, but we just don't have the time right now, unfortunately.
I think when we get this rest of the staff presentation, we can go back and I think if we can also receive these two presentations, because they're not in the backup, so when we do come back, we have that, and I think that'll help us with our overall conversation.
We'll make sure that they get reflected in board docs.
Do you want to make the comments before the DOT presentation? We have a guest from DOT, so I just want to make sure that he gets to speak, because I don't know that he can come to our next meeting.
Okay, well, I do want to thank Brandon Jones. He's the division engineer for Division 5. City of Raleigh has long had a very strong partnership between North Carolina Department of Transportation. So I want to thank Brandon for making today's meeting a priority. So nice to see you.
Hey, good evening, Madam Chair and council members. Glad to be with you tonight. Yeah, I just want to touch base on our litter program with NCDOT and specifically Division 5. We have several different events throughout the year and several different ways we attack litter in this area. So here's a map that shows different ways we have litter on different roads. And just to let you know, Wake County by far is the largest state-maintained system in the state of North Carolina as far as per county. It's about 50% higher than the next highest county, which is Guilford. Wake County, we have more state-maintained roads than the states of Hawaii, New Jersey, or Rhode Island. So it's a pretty big network we have in Wake County. So this map shows the different plans that we have of way of tackling litter, sponsor a highway, and we'll talk about each one of these, adopt a highway, our NCDOT roads, and city roads. So our sponsor a highway program started a little bit over 10 years ago, and we allow two different vendors to try to attract sponsors, and the sponsors pay the vendors directly to pick up segments of highway, 1 mile segments of highway. So in Wake County, we have over 218 of those segments that have been sponsored. We focus on the freeway system, so your interstates, US 64, US 1s. They pick up about 13 times a year per segment, and it allows the vendor, not the vendor, but the sponsor to have a sign with their name on it. So if you drive from Raleigh all the way to Mandio, I think Johnson Automotive has almost that entire mileage on US 64. They have over 195 miles just in Wake County, the largest sponsor nationwide, because a lot of states have this program. So it's been a very successful program. You'll see some numbers associated with this program in just a minute. Our Adopt a Highway program, I think most people are familiar with this, is a 100% volunteer program. Wake County has the most active contracts in the state, 391 active Adopt a Highway groups in Wake County. They typically adopt up to 2 mile sections of roadways. They pick up 4 times a year. You won't see Adopt a Highway on our freeway system, it's too dangerous. But you do see Adopt a Highways on other 2-lane primary routes and secondary roads. Some groups have been at this for a long time, over 30 years. Those contracts are renewed every 5 years. So here's some numbers from last fiscal year and up to date for this fiscal year as of May 6th. So this is pounds collected, so through our contract litter removal, so we not only have the Sponsor a Highway and Adopt a Highway program, we have a contractor that picks up litter. We try to coordinate that with our mowing cycles the best we can, except mowing moves a lot faster than litter pickup, so it's not always successful if there's a gap in time. But you can look at the numbers there just for Wake County. Last year, also in Wake County, we removed over 98,000 pounds from homeless encampments. We have a strong sweeping program. You think of our freeways with the median concrete barriers. About the only way to tackle picking up debris along those is through sweeping. So we do over 1,900 miles of shoulder miles of sweeping on our major routes. We remove bulk items. You see car parts, other things that are thrown out onto the highways or come off of unsecured loading of vehicles, over 152 bulk items. Wake County leads in picking up dead animals in the state. Over 3,000 dead animals picked up in Wake County, and we cleaned up 144 dump sites along the highway. But with that, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Yeah, and if there's any questions or comments about the prior presentations, I know Dr. Dahl is still here. I think Samantha maybe had to go. Councilmember Patton?
Yeah. Hi. Question about the deceased animals. I actually had a lot of constituent interest in this recently related to City of Raleigh's disposal, and the desire from the residents was that our staff procure like microchip readers so that if they were like household animals, that there could be communication to the owner. I was curious if that's ever come up for y'all, if that's something that you do.
It has, and I'm not sure. Most of that's picked up by a contractor, and we have certain stipulations in the contract. If it looks like a house, domestic animal, I think there is something in the contract that they have to at least make an effort to read the chip and notify somebody. But it may not be before they can dispose of the animal. Yep. Most of those are not domestic. Those are mostly, and some of the smaller animals we don't pick up, right? We have a lot of deer hit in Wake County.
Councilmember Branch?
Good to see you again.
You too.
We talk often about trash, and so my question is, what other resources do you all need to probably have more of a presence? Or how do you tackle hotspots? If you know an area is always known for trash, how do you address that?
We do have a hotspot list, so our contract team goes to those more often. Typically on our major interstates and freeways, we're picking up about 12 to 24 times a year on those routes. Other routes, it may be less. On our secondary roads, it may just be as needed, or we have a hotspot list that they go to and pick up. And if somebody calls about another spot, we can send the contract team to that spot.
And also, can you have a phone number or something that can be shared to our staff that we can share with the public on how to report trash on state roads? Because 9 times out of 10, when someone's calling, by the time I call our staff, they're like, oh, it's a state road. They need to call you all. So if we can have a method to help get that messaging out, or even if, since you already have a presence on your interstate, some type of signage where people can report it, because we see it all the time. I mean, we could leave here right now if we go down to get on 40 at South Saunders. In between South Saunders until you get to New Bern Avenue, I promise you, if you had one truck, you would fill it up with trash.
Absolutely. We do like to have folks report things through our website, ncdot.gov, contact us. You pick the county, you pick the route, you need to get it as close as possible to the location. It'll get to the right department. And you also report potholes, other type of road hazards as well.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure we'll be talking more about trash.
Absolutely, thanks.
Councilmember Black?
Hi, I don't have any questions for you. I think the highway cleanup program is great. I see it and I'm like, yes, clean up the highways. But I had a lot of comments on the presentations that we saw earlier. It really resonated with me. I don't know, for those who are watching, know that I previously worked at an environmental justice advocacy organization called People Over Plastic. So it was looking comprehensively at the plastic pollution, like, yes, physical plastic, like the things that we use to, like, for materials and building, but it's also looking at petrochemical, which is also like the beginning states of plastics and how that affects like environmental issues from the Gulf South all the way here. So I found this presentation really interesting when we're looking at the micro and macro plastics that we're seeing here. And I recently did a documentary on the Walnut Creek wetlands and the story of environmental justice. And when I was out there filming, I saw the trash like stopper. I can't remember the The trash trap. I like Trapper, the trash trapper. And I remember thinking this is pretty cool. So I would love to see that expansion across like the city of Raleigh. Since we are like as noted in the presentation, like seeing a lot of microplastics or macroplastics in the urban areas where the water can shed and the water is connecting to the microplastic issues we're seeing like further down the watershed, like towards like the Pamlico Sound and towards the ocean. I think one of the ways to really educate and connect people to the issue, because I think people see trash in many ways that the environmental movement, environmentalism has been framed over the last like 70 years. It's very much a like save the polar bears, save the ocean, like issues that don't seem very connected to them. But one of the things that I found really interesting that you brought up is the connection to these chemicals from the breakdown of plastics to the disruptions in the endocrine systems and disruptions for hormonal things. I am myself, along with many other people, other women, people who are able to get pregnant, have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is an endocrine like disruptor. And I've been trying to figure out why I have something like this, and I really think it's largely because of the types of things that we see in our foods, disruptions we see in our clothing and our water supply. And so looking at that really comprehensively is, I think, something that we should be looking at, because hormonal disruptions, endocrine diseases are on the rise, specifically within women. So I know last year, I think I was looking into the possibility of how we could get like some sort of look at plastic bags or the use of plastics. And then like within that same week, our General Assembly decided like we can't as a state pass anything around that. So I would love to see if we can, I know we haven't looked at, talked about, or been anywhere around our legislative agenda, but I would love to see how that could show up in conversation, since all of those waterways flow through the urban areas, and it starts with like largely macroplastics from like styrofoam, plastic bags, and like other things, and it's making its way into our waterways and finding its way further downstream. Like, it's a preventative measure, I think, to have like regulation, and like Raleigh seems to have a very big impact on what is happening downstream and how it's affecting what's going into the water. So I think we should have some special considerations maybe when we're looking at like just stopping the production and the use of plastic bags overtly in the area. And I think a lot of people have been interested in that, and it's disappointing that it's something that we're just not allowed to do. So I think it's something that we should look at. And yeah, the educational aspects, I think, needs to like bring it back to, if it's something that the city would be doing, and I still don't know because we're not going to get the presentation from the city today. But along with the education, I think it's interesting to like bring that back into the point of like how what's happening here has like lasting impacts of people downstream, but also the impacts to your health and the reality of like what your future could be. When we're looking at pollution, when we're looking at plastic waste, and when we're looking at water, and the environment in general, like bringing that back to people's understanding of self and their community, rather than like these overarching, like, let's just save water. Like, isn't water good? And water is good, but like, as the presenter mentioned, like there's highly motivated people like myself who has like piles of trash in my car because I just refuse to throw it out. And I think it also brings up a question about trash cans. Like I have friends who live downtown, and I went to a coffee shop on Person Street and walked the 3 blocks back to her house, and there wasn't one trash can in between the restaurant and her apartment building. So I just held onto the cup, even though it was empty. So I see that like a lot across downtown, and I know we're doing some expansions about that, but I would love to see that across the city, because I do think we have some trash can deserts. I don't know if that's a thing, but it feels like a thing. So those are all my thoughts and comments. I really appreciate you coming and presenting. It really resonated with me, and I think there's a lot that we can be doing to look at it. I love to hear how these localized impacts of these overarching conversations we hear about environmental pollution, like plastic waste, is like really impacting what is happening here locally and across the state. So thank you.
Great.
I've got a couple comments, and I think this whole conversation will really tee us up for our next GNR meeting, where we will get to hear from city staff about everything that's happening at the city level, and then to really discuss opportunities to make even more progress. I think that fact about styrofoam lasting 500 years in our waterways, I mean, yeah, that's scary. And to Councilmember Black's point, I also have PCOS, and it sucks. It sucks. Yeah, let's talk about that. GNR. So, you never know why these things happen in our lives, but, why don't we improve our environment and maybe help our health? And yeah, I like that. So a couple items to consider, I think, again, as we move along, these trash traps, I'm really curious to understand who's providing them long term. Is this something the city needs to partner on? If they are an effective tool, then, maybe this is something that we could be looking at. Is that something you want to speak to, Barbara?
And I'm sure the city will cover it, but they are doing a buy-in program where they're covering the costs of the additional traps with Sound Rivers and providing funding to Preston. He'll be cleaning out the traps, and also some funding so that he can provide money for people experiencing homelessness. He started to engage them to help with some of the cleanup work. So there will be like money for their time, salary time.
So there is one thing I forgot to mention. One of the things you talked about was like how we have our trash facilities, our trash receiving facilities, mostly outside of like our urban center. And I know that the JC one closed down last year. I got a call from a very wonderful older man who was very upset about this. And so I know there were some like use issues that like facilitated the closure of that. So I'm wondering like where we are with relooking at that. Can we get an update on?
I will mention that Count and Cary has a convenience center in the heart of it, even though, the landfills are county and the convenience centers, that they provide that for recycling as well as other trash to transfer that out. So that is a common, thing that some other cities have.
That's interesting.
Do you want me to address the question? Okay. So yes, we did have slides in this deck to address the history around that the convenience centers that both the city operates and that the county operates, some history on that. We did previously provide a report of the manager on a Friday to you, so we could distribute that report, given that there may be some lag before we get back to this item. So you did get a written report, but it's been a little while, so we could recirculate that, given the delay before we have this follow-up presentation. And I will just, we did intend to do a little bit of a preview high level to recognize that there is an enhanced partnership coming with the Greater Raleigh cleanup. I do believe you will probably, there's the possibility you'll see that on an agenda before we end up with this up next, growth and natural resources. So thanks to everybody, both the Greater Raleigh Cleanup and a number of departments in the Office of Sustainability that have been facilitating that increased scope. But you will probably see that. That'll be old news probably before we get to this GNR meeting.
And then just a couple other items to note that maybe we'll hear in the city presentation. Definitely I second in talking about the JC Center. I know I do get concerns from residents downtown or live near it who no longer have that easy access. And I'll just give an example of someone who's caring for a partner with a disability, and she has a lot on her plate, and she's just like, I don't know when I can ever get out of town kind of to take care of these things. So when we don't make it easy, we maybe prevent the good behavior. So what are our plans there? I think trash canisters are also, maybe we do have some trash deserts. We've got to work on that. And then I would love to look at other opportunities to either incentivize or work with companies, that are creating this pollution, styrofoam, plastic bags, how do we incentivize away from that use and get that out of our use entirely. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to move there. I know we have some constraints at the state level, but I would love to talk about that. So are there any other comments from the committee or questions before we wrap up? Okay, I do want to ask, would the committee like to meet earlier on June 25th? We have 3 items. We have the city presentation on litter, any additional committee conversation on that. We also have a tree discussion, and I know we're going to have some presentations both by staff and by the public. And then we have also a rezoning case.
I'm happy to meet earlier, but are the chambers available?
That's
earlier?
that was my question, because we have a EDI at 1:30.
We can coordinate that. I would not, I think generally on Tuesdays, the chambers are blocked, so I would not imagine that meeting would necessarily conflict, because it starts at
2:30. It would end like 3:30. If it were the latest, it would go. And we start at 4.
Yeah, it is blocked off, I think, until 3 in theory. I think it starts at 1:30. So
I'll make the motion that we'll start at 3 p.m. on June 25th to get through those 3 items. I see a second. All in favor? All right. That was unanimous. Do I need to report anything else out here, Tansy? Okay.
No, you're good.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. The GNR committee meeting has ended.